All right, so Mr. Trump spent a lot of time last night talking about energy, all right? Talked about the economy, and central to that was energy. And let's talk about it with Senator Kevin Cramer, North Dakota. Senator, welcome back. As always, want to get your take on all this, but let me play some sound for you. Here was the opening gambit in the speech about, I think, your favorite topic. Please take a listen.
Sure.
Joe Biden has intentionally surrendered our energy independence. There is no longer even a thought of dominance, and we are now begging for energy help from foreign nations. On day one, we will end Joe Biden's war on American energy.
All right, and let me just add one other thing he said. I'm going to quote directly. They say the ocean will rise 1/8 of an inch over the next 200 to 300 years. But don't worry about nuclear weapons that could take out entire countries with one shot. And by that, he said Biden never talks about nuclear power. And I think, that's a reference to China. That's a reference to Russia. That's a reference to the Ukraine. Anyway, Senator Cramer, what did you make of the speech? What do you make of the energy portions of the speech?
Well, in a word, amen. I mean, this is something that Donald Trump has always had right. He and I started talking about this early in his campaign, and he executed a plan to make America not just energy independent, but yes, energy dominant, which added to our national security. It reduced inflation. It brought down the costs of everything that we grow, produce, and manufacture, because he brought down the cost of the one thing in everybody's value chain, and that's energy. And that's good for everybody. It's especially good for working class Americans and, frankly, for people on the lower end of the economic spectrum. So right on, and I think obviously it resonated with the crowd, but I think it's the kind of message that resonates with everybody.
Yeah, I mean, refined petroleum it permeates the whole economy. It affects everyday life of everybody. And you're right, middle and lower middle class people particularly. Were you pleased to hear? I mean, basically, he says the first thing he'll do. The first thing he'll do, essentially, is open up the spigots, which I think is a rallying cry for Republicans in the Senate and the new Republican majority in the House.
Well, you and I have been talking about it like this for a long, long time, and we'll continue to talk about it. But if he does that, if he becomes president, he does what he said he'll do on the first day with regard to energy, he will have done more to improve the economy of the United States on his first day in office than Joe Biden could ever do, well, particularly with the methods that he tries to use. So no question that it's a rallying cry. But it is a rallying cry, Larry, that a lot of Republicans have heard. As you know, he's not the only person saying it anymore. He might have been the first person saying it, at least using the bully pulpit that he had to say it with. But everybody's gathering around that message now. So it was a very welcome message last night.
What'd you think about the line that, the oceans may rise by 1/8 of an inch over the next 200 to 300 years, 200 to 300 years, but Biden never wants to talk about nuclear policy, nuclear threats, and so forth. What did you think about that? Where do you think Mr. Trump was going on that one?
So it's got a couple of facets to it, clearly, and I think you've touched on them. But first of all, it points out the incredible hypocrisy of the left, who doesn't want any technology or innovations, including, really, can we say it, the cleanest form of electric generation that exists, and that, of course, is nuclear. It's the perfect fuel, particularly today with small modular reactors and the ability to deploy them and dispatch them. So on the one hand, he's making an energy statement, and he's right. On the other hand, he's making a national security statement, and not apart just from the energy piece. I've often been concerned that our acquiescence of energy or of nuclear and even the fuel uranium, acquiescing that excellence to overseas adversaries is one of the greatest mistakes that we've made in recent history. And in doing so, we've literally limited the resources, including the intellectual resources, to build nuclear weapons. And here we find ourselves on the brink of, hopefully not, but the possibility certainly of a World War III, beginning in Europe. You've got a very aggressive China, 100 kilometers from the island of Taiwan. Obviously, a lot of American interests there. So I think President Trump very cleverly made a national security and energy security and, frankly, a climate case in just a couple of sentences.
I mean, I'm just thinking this through. with all the Russian saber rattling about nuclear weapons, for example, but also they never talk. The Green New Deal doesn't ever seem to include nuclear, which you're inferring yourself a moment ago. And I think Trump was kind of getting at that, you know, we should look at solar, we should look at wind, we should reopen oil and gas spigots, but how about nuclear? And then the last point is missile defense. I think Mr. Trump was also saying, I'm going to rebuild and reignite our missile defense system because you got these crazy people like Putin around the world running around making threats. I mean, I think that's also, missile defense is a big part of this.
Well, it is a big part of it, but we need to be, we also need to have a good deterrent, and a deterrent is built by our ability to be on offense. So we need to do all of the above on the missile front as well, and on the weapons front as well. We need to have space weapons, we need to have air weapons, you know, sea weapons. We need a military arsenal that prevents war. But in the case that we would be under attack, we also need to be able to defend our own shores. So again, all of this stuff has a national security component to it, obviously, as well as an energy component. But perhaps as importantly as anything, it also has a economic security component to it. And if we get into a squabble with China, they are every bit as likely to use economic tools and weapons as they are any other type of weapon of war. So this is something that Donald Trump intuitively understood. He ran for president, became president, he engaged on these issues, and as a consequence, I think you're going to see other Republicans get into the presidential sweepstakes. I hope what they do. I hope we see a bunch of them on the stage for multiple very entertaining debates again, because as is said, iron sharpens iron.
Yeah.
But Donald Trump has set the foundation for the discussion with Republicans, and I look forward to a lot of people getting engaged.
Free market competition, I love it. Last 30 seconds, Senator Cramer, do we believe Biden, do we believe Schumer that there'll be some kind of Joe Manchin permitting bill in this lame duck session? What do you think?
Well, I believe both of them want that to happen. It's hard for me to see it getting to that point because, frankly, I have a hard time believing that the negotiators of the National Defense Authorization Act want to further burden that piece of very important must-pass piece of legislation with something like permitting reform, especially when it's so unsettled at this point. But if we can get something that actually is meaningful, as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, I'd do my part to try and get something passed. But it has to be meaningful. It can't just be lipstick on a pig.
All right. Many thanks, Senator Kevin Cramer. We appreciate it as always.